This is your World War III update. Here's what's going down. At the time of making this video, which is at 9:30 Central Standard Time, by the time you get it, it'll be around 11:30 Central Standard Time because it takes me about 2 hours to upload via Starlink out here in the bug-out boondocks, recording in the greenhouse today. And then, of course, YouTube has to pre-screen it, make sure it's well within the Overton window to clear it, do all the background checks, make sure it's ready to go for monetization. Anyways, what we know at this point in time is that Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, is currently in Moscow for the better part of the day, okay? Speaking with Vladimir Putin. That's very significant. So he didn't go there to meet another foreign minister. If you're going to Moscow and you're talking to Vladimir Putin, that means serious business. Now, the Kremlin has released, a Kremlin official, I should say, who is successor to the throne, either second, third, or fourth removed. There's a debate about that. Dmitry Medvedev wrote a 10-point rebuttal to the American bombing of the Iranian Fordo nuclear facility. Quite critical, in fact, surprisingly so, in light of the fact that the Russians have always kind of been on the fence with Iran. Now it's clear that they are making a stance. Now, we need to talk about the Strait of Hormuz, which, according to the Iranian parliament who voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, they're awaiting ratification from the National Security Council to approve that move. So if they do go through with it and close the Strait of Hormuz, or attempt to, that is going to be obviously incredibly significant. There are naval movements currently being tracked on maritime trackers that corroborate that in terms of Iran's military, in addition to a lot of the cargo shipping containers that are quickly exiting the region or avoiding the region altogether. Of course, that's where 20 to 30% of the global oil flows transit through. So if that strait were to be closed, that is Iran's nuclear option. That is their Samson option equivalent. However, they may still have a nuclear option, and we're going to talk about that today. Now, let's talk about Dmitry Medvedev's 10-point rebuttal to the U.S. government's decision to do the largest ever stealth bombing campaign in history. That's significant unto itself. Mr. Nothing Ever Happens. Remember, guys, World War III is a process. It ends with a nuclear bomb. It doesn't start with one. This is World War III. In fact, the Iranians today captured 3 Ukrainian saboteurs who were about to sabotage a Iranian drone factory. So that's how closely these things are linked. The Israelis and NATO and the Americans, of course, are perfectly in cahoots and aligned, and that it became abundantly clear when they basically ran the exact same play in Russia on their nuclear bases as Israel did in Iran, utilizing their subversives in Iran in order to take out the command and control and attempt to do regime change, which is very much still the prime directive. People need to understand that. This is the prime directive. For starters, there is a debate, regardless of what Donald Trump says, as to whether or not the damage that was done to Fordow is significant at all. They're claiming that it is, but of course, we're never really going to know unless you can get visuals, and you're never likely going to get that because the International Atomic Energy Agency is no longer trusted by the Iranians because they've given all of the information to the Israelis and the Americans in order to do this very operation. So, what we can see from satellites are 6 penetration points on the mountain. And these mountains are 500 meters deep, so it's impossible to say whether or not these did any significant damage to the actual subterranean facilities. Donald Trump claims they did. The Iranians are claiming they didn't. The Russians are claiming there was no significant damage whatsoever. But I think people are missing the bigger point here, okay? The bigger picture is that, well, you have to go back and watch my video last night where I deal in all the rhetorical talking points. But the bigger picture that a lot of people miss, and I think it's part of our Western-centric thinking, there's a lot of people who can't find Iran on a map, okay? And there's people walking around out there who actually believe that Fordow is the only dumb that Iran has deep underground military base. Okay, there's people who actually walk around believe that shit. Iran has hundreds of these underground missile cities, hundreds of underground bunkers that go under mountains, underneath 500 meters of rock. So the notion that this was, the end game for the Iranian nuclear program or for the Iranians in general is just Western hubris. Now, what we do know with respect to Fordow is that satellite imagery confirms the day before, just the day before this happened, which means that the Iranians must have either been tipped off by the Russians or, as some people are suggesting, the Americans advised the Iranian or told the Iranians that, hey, you better get out of this facility because we're going to bomb the shit out of it, get your people out of there. I don't necessarily believe that because that really wouldn't make much sense, because then, of course, they'd be able to have time to move the enriched uranium, which would mean that you'd have to go at them again in some other way, which means that this war is clearly not over. But there is a convoy of vehicles, must be 20 to 30 vehicles on satellite imagery the day before, clearly transporting some enriched uranium or something, centrifuges possibly. You wouldn't need that many trucks to transport small amounts of uranium. I don't think it's dense, it's heavy, but depending on how much. Anyways, so I suspect that they were probably trying to disassemble the entire infrastructure down there. And this is a country that has a $1 trillion GDP. It's a vast country with 90 million people. Sure, they may be struggling financially, but they can find a few $1 million to build a few more centrifuges. I mean, that's not, to think that that's not a possibility is stupid. So despite knowing this, they must have been tipped off by somebody, because I don't believe the argument that Trump would have tipped them off beforehand, because then that just defeats the purpose. Unless, of course, this was just to pick a fight, which it was. Okay, this is so that the Iranians are going to now attack U.S. military bases, and they're already talking about regime change and the inherent contradiction of Trump saying that now we have to make a deal, even though he's claiming that the problem has been neutralized, or the threat, I should say, of devising a nuclear weapon within a short period of time has been neutralized. But let's hear what Dmitry Medvedev has to say. Again, the Russians have good intel, okay? So let's just see what they have to say. And yes, Dmitry Medvedev is head of the National Security Council in Russia, so he's a fairly big deal, as incorrigible as he may be. Iran's critical nuclear infrastructure appears largely intact or only slightly damaged. Okay, that's fairly significant of a statement. Uranium enrichment and now openly future nuclear weapons production will continue. So he's speaking on behalf of, he's assuming, I don't know if the Iranians would agree to this statement, but he explicitly states that not only will uranium enrichment continue, but nuclear weapons production will continue. But that's neither here nor there, because number 3, he says that several countries are reportedly willing to supply Iran with nuclear warheads directly. The North Koreans, perhaps the Russians, perhaps it was North Korean stubbornness that caused them to not want to work with the Russians more closely. The Iranians only finally ratified that deal between the Russians, I think on Monday last week. Like, they finally signed it into law last Monday, which is strange. Allegedly, the Russians were willing to work with the Iranians, but maybe there's some distrust there due to a very complicated history between the two countries who are once at war, of course, or periodically throughout history. So several countries are reportedly willing to supply Iran with nuclear warheads. So who could those countries possibly be? Well, there's Pakistan. Now, Pakistan just said that they nominate Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize, but they're very duplicitous, because on the same token, they've also said that the defense minister, in fact, in their parliament said that we need to come to the aid of the Iranians. Now, is this just lip service? Are they just leading the Iranians on and then, of course, having luncheons with Donald Trump, as their chief of staff recently did just before these strikes took place? It's very possible that they're just stringing the Iranians on, much like the platitudes of the Saudis, who always condemn strikes on Iran or Gaza or Lebanon, but never do anything about it, and in fact welcome Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu with open arms. So, is it going to be North Korea? Is it going to be Pakistan? Is it going to be Russia? Is it going to be the Chinese? There's a lot of countries that could, in fact, give the Iranians nuclear weapons. So, now they're definitely going to pursue it. They're not going to be party to the non-proliferation treaty. Why would they be? And you can tell by the look on Abbas Araghchi's face that he knows that this is only the beginning of a much bigger war. Well, things just brightened up there on the camera. The U.S. is now entangled in a new conflict, this is number 5, with the possibility of a ground war looming. Now, how do we get from there? Again, we've already taken the opening shot, and that really does cross a threshold because it's always easier to do it a second time in the minds of the population. And of course, now the argument is going to be, well, we destroyed Fordow, but they were able to evacuate all of their enriched uranium, so now we got to go and find out where it is. According to Mossad, they claim to know where it is, and I could suspect that that may be true because it's not hard to find out where a large convoy of vehicles is going when the place is riddled with spies. So in that respect, I could see that they might know that this stuff was transported, but we don't even know if the facility is destroyed. I could see them wanting to take a precaution, as a precautionary measure, move out all of the equipment just in case, but there is no evidence that Fordow has been destroyed, okay? And the two other facilities, Natanz and Isfahan, there's no evidence that those have been completely destroyed, aside the superficial structures on the top, which are purely and always have been just for show. Iran's political system remains stable. If anything, it may have emerged even stronger. So again, if the Iranians can endure through this period and close their ranks and maintain rule of law and order, and the internet is still out there, they are strictly cracking down on saboteurs and subversives that are infiltrating the country from everywhere, from Azerbaijan, from Israel, of course, from Iraq, and they're attempting to get the situation under control. If they can get it under control, then of course their power is going to be consolidated even more, and they're going to be a greater force to be reckoned with. So if they can get through this period of time and endure, then they're going to be in a much stronger position. They've yet to respond to the Israelis, which is interesting, which means perhaps they are starting to, again, consolidate their forces for a larger attack that is about to take place. Of course, the Israelis continue to do strikes deep inside Iran, which again, if your main purpose was to set the nuclear program back, which many Israeli intelligence officials claim that they have, then there would be no reason for these strikes. The fact that they continue to do it means that the prime directive is still regime change, and that has always been the main directive. It's never been about nuclear weapons. Arguably, even if the Iranians get nuclear weapons at this point in time, it's a debate as to whether or not that would stop NATO, because of course we've seen how far they're willing to push countries like Russia, who have the most nuclear weapons in the world. So if you only have 10 nuclear weapons, and unless you're Crazy Kim over there in North Korea, they might still mess with you and try to see where your real red line is, if you know what I mean. It doesn't take much to blow the shit out of Tel Aviv or Haifa with a small yield tactical nuke. Public support has rallied around Iran's religious leadership, even from previous critics. Now, I think that's a subjective assessment. Obviously, a lot of the Iranian diaspora are not necessarily good indicators of what the people in Iran actually think, right? Because they all fled. So a lot of these Iranian pundits that you see who are anti-Iranian regime, there may be support for that there, and I'm sure that there is to a certain degree or another, but it's kind of like how, let's say as an American citizen, when the majority of my viewers are American, even as a Canadian citizen, I might not like the Liberals and you might not like the Democrats, but if we were at war, you would defend the Liberals. You would defend the Democrats. You will defend people's right to say what they want. At least that's the essence of the ethos of freedom and liberty and democracy. So I think we have to kind of conceptualize it like that. They don't want regime change imposed from the outside by some guy who has been expatriated long ago. So, and who's just going to come back and crown himself king. And the Shah had their own set of problems. In fact, there's a deep history to all of that I would encourage people to go and study, because at the Shah's end of his reign, the U.S. kind of threw him under the bus. There's some interesting videos on YouTube of him talking about the, let's just say, leadership class, some leadership circles within the American elite establishment, and his criticisms of those special interest groups, we'll say. And then suddenly, he was overthrown by the theocracy. Interesting how that worked. I'll let you do your own research on that. We're trying to keep this video in the Overton window here. Trump, who came into office branding himself as a peace president, has now launched another war. Okay, yeah. You know, in fairness, I knew Trump was going to do it, but I also suspected that, you know, maybe he thought it was going to be some swift decapitation style victory, and that somehow he's going to be able to say that he made peace out of this. That is yet to be seen, and I highly doubt that that is going to be the case, because now if the Iranians don't respond, then they're setting the precedent that you can attack us as much as you want and we will not respond. Even when they are responding, the Israelis and the Americans respond. So they absolutely have to do something, whether it will be Pyrrhic or of actual significance. Are they actually going to do something asymmetrical in order to reestablish deterrence, or are they just going to keep getting pushed around? We don't know. All it would take at this point is a nuclear umbrella and maybe some S-400, some real deal missile defense systems, because I suspect that had they had the advanced missile defense that they purportedly were supposed to get from the Russians, that what we just seen may not have been able to happen. And this is one of the biggest missed opportunities from a Russian or Chinese point of view in terms of an attempt to shoot one of those things down. Okay, are they ever going to get that opportunity again? 7 stealth bombers, I think it was, flying over. I don't know. Was it 7? Or I know there was, I can't remember. There's an infographic that I just checked out, and I know that there was some used as a diversion or something like that, which was silly because everybody knew it was coming anyways. Most of the world opposes the actions. Yeah, that's the thing. The United States intel officers are like, this was a masterful 4D chess move. We deceived them into making them think that they were going one way to Guam on flight radar. Everybody in Iran was literally waiting that day for the attack. Okay, so I guess the directionality in which the attack came, that might have been the difference, and that might have been the deciding factor in terms of evading their missile defense. I don't know, but it had little to do with, you know, the Iranians being fooled into thinking that we weren't going to do it. So, yeah, Trump is no longer the peace president. As I said last night, his legacy, you know, it's hard to say how much he cares about his legacy. Clearly, he cares about the Israelis' legacy more. That should be evident by now. And this is his final term. So this notion that he needs to appease his voting base doesn't really check out at this point in time, if you know what I mean. It would if he was planning re-election. He knows that people are so fickle that whatever he does likely won't reflect on J.D. Vance. And, you know, maybe there'll be some controversy where him and JD will part ways, kind of like the whole Elon saga. And then it will be all, people will think that JD's new and improved and basically detached himself from the Trump association, or however that's going to play out. According to Medvedev, most of the world opposes the actions of Israel and the United States. Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that that's probably the case. The better part of South America, with the exception of Argentina, you know, the Chinese, possibly even the Indians. Obviously, all of these countries have to be looking at this, whether they dislike Iran or not, and they have to be saying, this country just unilaterally attacked a sovereign entity who is signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, coming to the support of a war criminal as designated by the International Criminal Court. Now, that might seem excusable to us here in the West, but to the other 7 billion people in the world, not so much. With results like these, Trump can forget about a Nobel Peace Prize. Even a corrupt committee wouldn't go that far. Quite the start, Mr. President. Dmitry Medvedev. What do you guys think in the comment section below? Let me know. Excited to hear those responses. And yeah, we were going to release a bunch of videos over on Canadian Prepper. I'm starting beekeeping. We got some World War III survival gear type stuff to share with you. But it just wasn't a good weekend to upload with people so fixated on this Middle East stuff. But there's always next week, but who knows what next week is going to bring. Just remember, this is the beginning of the war with Iran. Certainly not the end. There's a long way to go. And all I can say is keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, don't get too high-strung about it. Watch the video I released on Friday on the Canadian Prepper channel, where I talk about the preparedness DEFCON levels as it pertains to Iran. So DEFCON 5 would be essentially the economic outcomes that we might see as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. DEFCON 4 would be the not the civil unrest, but the potential for cyber security threats, cyber attacks, and bringing down various essential systems here in North America or in Europe. Level 3, or DEFCON 3, and remember the DEFCON is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch, imminent nuclear war, so DEFCON 5 being the most innocuous and DEFCON 1 being the most severe. DEFCON 3 would be civil unrest and protests and the corresponding boots on the ground, martial law, that sort of stuff. DEFCON 4 will be the kinetic aspect of things with respect to, or sorry, DEFCON 2 would be, always get these confused. DEFCON 2 will be when things get kinetic, hybrid warfare style with the saboteurs, sleeper cells emerging. There's already talk of that. It's a catchy buzzword on mainstream media, so it almost makes you wonder if they're going to use that for some xenophobic Iranian dragnet or something in the future. And then DEFCON 1, of course, is an actual nuclear incident or a full-blown hot war, which potentially has nuclear repercussions. So because a nuclear war in the Middle East, at least at the start, will be largely regionalized, I've never fully understood why a lot of people think that the end of the world is going to start there. I mean, I get it. Eschatologically speaking, that region has a lot of significance. However, you still need the big players to view it as an existential threat for them to want to throw their nukes into the pot, right? So we could be seeing that, though. The meeting with Aragachi and Putin is fairly significant, especially in light of the circumstances. Are they just talking about the Russians fulfilling Iran's nuclear enrichment needs as part of some rebranded JCPOA Part 2? I doubt it, because as I've indicated previously, the Russians are trying to bait the Americans into fighting a war in the Middle East. So whatever Russia is doing, it's to string the Iranians along and likely try to compel them to fight. I think that's what this is going to be about. I think the Russians most certainly want a war in the Middle East. They want to ensure that NATO cannot really establish a foothold, certainly not in Iran, and not have free reign around the Caspian Sea. The last thing they need is to have another NATO lake in the south of their country. Anyways, guys, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section about all this insanity. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.